Orange flames erupted from the yacht's starboard side, painting Port Haven Harbor in hellish light. Marcus Thompson gripped the wheel of his fishing boat, calculating odds that kept getting worse. 30 seconds, maybe less, before that million-dollar vessel became a floating coffin. Salt spray mixed with acrid smoke as he cut through debris, closing distance to the Sterling Dream. The sleek yacht twisted in the pre-dawn darkness, listing hard toward the icy Maine waters. Through the black smoke, movement flickered inside the cabin. Someone trapped. Marcus's weathered hands tightened on the wheel, mind racing to the small blue house on the harbor's edge where Zoe slept. 8 years old, heart murmur that kept him awake most nights, surgery looming they couldn't afford. If something happened to him out here, his daughter would have no one. The Bradfords would make sure of that. The yacht's port side suddenly erupted. Decision made. Marcus cut the engine, dropped anchor with practiced efficiency, and swung himself onto the small dinghy lashed to the stern. October air sliced through his canvas jacket as he rowed toward the burning vessel. Each stroke measured against spreading flames. Through shattered cabin windows, he glimpsed a figure slumped over the navigation console. Female. Unmoving. Marcus forced himself through the flooding cabin, smoke burning his lungs. Found her unconscious. A woman in her early 40s, elegant even in distress. Silk blouse clinging to her frame, diamond earrings catching emergency lights from shore. Everything about her screamed wealth he'd never imagined, the kind that turned human beings into news cycles. He checked her pulse, weak but steady. Hoisting her over his shoulder, Marcus fought against time and rising water as the yacht groaned around them. Back in the dinghy, he laid her down, covered her with his spare jacket before rowing with powerful strokes toward his fishing boat. The distance seemed impossibly long. Behind them, the yacht's fuel tanks threatened to blow any second. Once aboard, Marcus radioed Coast Guard, reporting the burning yacht and requesting immediate medical assistance at the Port Haven dock. The Sterling Dream exploded as he steered away, the contrast stark. A vessel worth more than he'd earn in 5 lifetimes, reduced to burning wreckage, while his 30-year-old fishing boat, patched and weathered, carried them safely through the dawn light. At the dock, emergency lights flashed as paramedics rushed forward with a stretcher. Marcus handed the woman over, explaining what little he knew. One of the paramedics recognized her, eyes widening in a way that made Marcus's stomach drop. That's Victoria Sterling, the tech CEO. Reporters and harbor police converged, cameras flashing, questions flying. Marcus Thompson did something that would haunt them both for weeks. He melted back into the morning fog, without giving his name, leaving behind only wet footprints and the mystery of a hero who saved a life, then vanished like smoke. His truck rumbled down the coastal road as first light broke over the pines. Clothes still reeked of smoke, hands trembling slightly on the steering wheel. He'd left before anyone could get his name or take his picture, and with excellent reason. Charles and Eleanor Bradford had been fighting for custody of Zoe since Jennifer died 3 years ago, arguing Marcus's modest income and demanding work schedule made him an unfit father. A media circus was the last thing he needed. The small blue house came into view, perched on Port Haven's edge with weathered shingles and a narrow porch facing the sea. Marcus parked and moved quietly inside, checking the kitchen clock. 5:38. Still time to shower before Zoe woke for school. Under the hot water, he tried to wash away the morning's events, but his mind kept returning to the woman's face, the weight of her unconscious body as he'd carried her from certain death. Victoria Sterling. He'd heard the name before, business magazines at the grocery store checkout, news segments about technology innovation. One of those people whose lives generated headlines, whose problems got solved with phone calls to governors and senators. Exactly the kind of attention that would destroy him in family court. Zoe was awake when he emerged, sitting at their small kitchen table drawing. blonde curls catching early sunlight. Her small fingers gripped a blue crayon as she sketched flames rising from water. Her face lit up at the sight of him, smile so much like Jennifer's it still caught him off guard 3 years later. "You're home, Daddy. I heard the big boom." Her voice carried innocent certainty. "Woke me up at 4:30. I looked out my window and saw the yacht on fire." "You rowed out to save someone." Marcus's chest tightened. Of course she'd seen it. Zoe's bedroom faced the harbor directly, offering clear sightlines to the docks. She would have witnessed everything: the burning yacht, his dinghy approaching through smoke, him carrying someone to safety. He knelt to her eye level, hands gentle on her shoulders. "That's a beautiful drawing, sweetheart. But we need to keep this between us, okay? Sometimes helping people is private, not something we talk about outside our family." Zoe nodded solemnly, though her expression showed she didn't fully understand. Marcus wasn't certain how to explain that her innocent observations could cost him everything. How do you tell a child that the world measures worth in dollar signs? That courts looked at mechanics differently than they looked at doctors or lawyers? That being a single black father raising a biracial daughter in a town of 3,000 made every choice feel like walking a tightrope? "But Daddy, you were so brave. You're like a superhero." Zoe returned to her drawing, adding details to the rescue scene. "The lady you saved, is she okay?" "She's going to be fine. That's all that matters." Marcus made breakfast as Zoe drew, adding more elements to her artwork. The burning yacht, his fishing boat, 2 figures silhouetted against flames. The stack of medical bills on the counter seemed to grow taller every week, silent reminder of the surgery Zoe would eventually need. Dr. Rachel Morrison had been clear about the timeline. 6 months, preferably sooner. Each day that passed was borrowed time. At Port Haven Elementary, Marcus watched Zoe join her friends, backpack nearly as big as she was. From the driver's side mirror, he caught sight of his own reflection. Deep lines around his eyes, gray creeping into his dark hair at 42. He'd aged a decade in the 3 years since Jennifer's cancer took her. The radio crackled to life as he started the truck. Local news already reporting the dramatic yacht rescue in Port Haven Harbor. The reporter's voice filled the cab, professional and distant. "The owner of the vessel has been identified as Victoria Sterling, founder and CEO of Sterling Technologies. Ms. Sterling was rescued by an unidentified local fisherman who left the scene before authorities could take his statement. Ms. Sterling was transported to Portland Memorial Hospital, where she remains in stable condition. The cause of the fire is under investigation. Anyone with information about the rescuer is asked to contact Port Haven Police. A $25,000 reward is being offered." Marcus's stomach tightened. $25,000 would cover half of Zoe's surgery. But that kind of money came with strings, interviews, photographs, questions about his life that would inevitably reach the Bradfords' attorneys. They'd spin it as Marcus abandoning his sleeping child to rescue a stranger, evidence of reckless priorities and poor judgment. He turned off the radio, hands clenching the wheel. At Peterson's Marine, Marcus clocked in for his shift, nodding to the other workers already elbow-deep in boat engines. The familiar smell of motor oil and fiberglass resin steadied him as he pulled on coveralls. He'd been fixing boats since high school, first under his father's guidance, then on his own after the old man's heart gave out. The work paid less than he'd like, but it offered flexible hours that allowed him to be there for Zoe's doctor appointments and school events. By mid-morning, the marina buzzed with talk of the yacht fire, theories spreading faster than the flames had. Marcus kept his head down, focusing on the outboard motor he was rebuilding. Mercury 90 horsepower, carburetor gummed up from bad fuel, fuel lines cracked from age. Methodical work that required attention, left no room for worrying about things outside his control. Pete Peterson waved a newspaper as he approached Marcus's workstation, weathered face creased with excitement. "You see this? Some local guy pulled Victoria Sterling out of a burning yacht this morning, then disappeared. They're offering $25,000 for information. Can you believe that? $25,000 just for a name." Marcus nodded along, offering non-committal responses while tightening a fuel line with more force than necessary. When Pete mentioned the reward again, Marcus's wrench slipped, scraping his knuckles raw. Blood welled from the cut as he processed the information. A reward meant more attention, more people looking. Port Haven was small, barely 3,000 year-round residents. Secrets didn't last long here, especially when money was involved. Walt Johnson appeared in the doorway as Marcus wrapped his hand with shop rags, the old fisherman moving with the careful deliberation of someone whose joints had fought too many winters. 70-something, hands gnarled by decades of hauling traps, Walt had known Marcus since he was a boy, learning to tie bowlines on his father's boat. "That hand needs proper attention, son." Walt's voice carried no judgment, just practical concern. Marcus followed him to the small break room where a first aid kit lived on the wall. Walt cleaned the cut with steady hands, applied antibiotic ointment, wrapped it with gauze that was actually sterile. "Careless work isn't like you." Marcus said nothing. Walt had a way of seeing through silence, reading the currents beneath calm surfaces. "Heard about the rescue this morning. Some fool risked his life pulling a stranger from a burning yacht, then walked away from $25,000. Walt's eyes met Marcus's in a way that made lying pointless. Man like that must have powerful reasons for staying invisible. The unspoken understanding hung between them. Walt had lived in Port Haven his entire life, watched the town change, seen how money and attention could destroy as easily as it could save. He knew about the custody battle. Everyone in town knew. Small communities kept few secrets from themselves, even as they closed ranks against outsiders. Some men can't afford to be heroes. Walt's words landed soft but certain. Not when being seen might cost them everything that matters. Marcus's throat tightened. The old man understood. Real heroes do what's right because it's right, Walt continued, securing the bandage with tape. Not for recognition or reward. Not for their name in the paper or money in their pocket. They do it because when the moment comes, there's no other choice that lets them look in the mirror afterward. He packed up the first aid kit, movements unhurried. Of course, a man in that situation might also worry about how it looks, leaving his child alone to save a stranger. Folks who don't understand might twist it, use it as evidence of poor judgment. Walt's expression held no accusation, only acknowledgement of hard truths. But I figure a man who saves a life at 4:30 in the morning was already awake, already out on his boat earning a living for his family. Nothing reckless about that. Just a fisherman doing his job who happened to be in the right place when someone needed help. Marcus exhaled slowly. Walt had just given him the narrative he needed if the truth ever came out. Not abandonment, but responsibility. Not recklessness, but competence. "Appreciate the bandage." Walt nodded, heading for the door. "You're a good father, Marcus. Don't let anyone tell you different. And if that fool who saved Victoria Sterling happens to cross your path, you tell him some of us understand why he walked away." During lunch break, Marcus called Dr. Rachel Morrison's office in Portland, inquiring again about the timeline for Zoe's surgery. The conversation followed its familiar pattern: medical terms Marcus had taught himself to understand, cost estimates that made his chest tighten, gentle but firm reminder that waiting too long carried its own risks. The surgery needed to happen within 6 months, Dr. Morrison said, her voice balancing professional distance with genuine concern. "Preferably sooner. Zoe's mitral valve is deteriorating faster than we'd hoped." Marcus hung up and stared at the calculator app on his phone, running the numbers again as if they might somehow change. They didn't. Total cost, $120,000. Insurance would cover 60%, out of pocket, $48,000. His savings account held $12,000, accumulated over 3 years of skipping meals and working double shifts. Even if he sold the fishing boat, even if he mortgaged the house beyond what the bank would allow, the math didn't work. The Bradfords could write a check tomorrow and not notice the dent in their accounts. That's what Charles had said during their last confrontation, words delivered with the casual cruelty of someone who'd never worried about money. "We can provide everything Zoe needs: medical care, education, opportunities. What can you offer her, Marcus? Debt and disappointment?" The answer had stuck in Marcus's throat then, and it stuck there now. What he could offer was love, presence, the knowledge that she mattered more than anything in the world. But the legal system measured worth differently. The custody hearing was 4 weeks away, and every day brought new evidence the Bradfords could weaponize. Medical bills, late mortgage payments, the gap between what Zoe needed and what Marcus could provide, growing wider despite everything he did. Across the bay in Portland Memorial Hospital, Victoria Sterling's eyes fluttered open to a world of sterile white and steady electronic beeping. Confusion clouded her vision as ceiling tiles came into focus. Her throat burned from smoke inhalation, hospital gown rough against her skin. She pressed a hand to her forehead, finding a bandage there. A nurse with kind eyes adjusted her IV drip, explaining how a local fisherman had pulled her from the burning yacht before disappearing without a trace. No name, no contact information, nothing but wet footprints on the dock that had already dried in the morning sun. Victoria's mind, sharp even through the fog of pain medication, latched on to this mystery. Who risks their life for a stranger, then walks away without recognition or reward? Her entire professional life had been built on understanding motivations, on the fundamental belief that everyone wanted something: money, power, status, security. The specifics varied, but the underlying drive remained constant. This fisherman's actions defied her entire worldview. As her head cleared, Victoria began piecing together fragmentary memories. Strong arms lifting her, calloused hands checking her pulse, the smell of engine oil mixed with salt water. Her rescuer had been middle-aged, with dark hair graying at the temples and eyes that had seen hard times. Black, she thought, though the smoke and darkness made certainty impossible. Beyond that, her memory offered nothing but confusion and fear. Sarah Bennett, Victoria's personal assistant for 7 years, arrived with an overnight bag and Victoria's laptop. Efficient as always, Sarah had already rescheduled meetings, issued press statements, and contacted insurance about the yacht. What she couldn't provide was information about the mysterious rescuer. Victoria's fingers tapped impatiently on the hospital bed rail. Hire someone to find this man. Not the police. They move too slowly and with too much publicity. A private investigator. Discreet, but thorough. Sarah's fingers flew across her tablet, making arrangements. Victoria had never left a debt unpaid or a favor unacknowledged in her 20-year rise to the top of the tech industry. She wouldn't start now, especially not with the person who had saved her life. The doctor who examined Victoria that evening was direct about her condition. Smoke inhalation, minor burns, a concussion. She'd been fortunate. Another minute in that cabin, and they wouldn't be having this conversation. When asked about discharge, he recommended at least 2 more days of observation, advice Victoria immediately planned to ignore. Alone in her hospital room that night, Victoria scrolled through emails on her laptop, trying to distract herself from the questions circling her mind. Sterling Technologies stock had dipped slightly following news of her accident, but nothing catastrophic. The executive team had things well in hand. Her near-death experience hadn't even registered as a significant market event, a thought both reassuring and vaguely unsettling. At 40 years old, Victoria had built Sterling Technologies from a startup in her garage to a multinational corporation with 35,000 employees. Her life was measured in quarterly reports, strategic acquisitions, and innovation cycles. Looking around the empty hospital room, she realized something strange. Not a single personal visitor. Her emergency contact had been Sarah. No family had rushed to her bedside. No close friends had called, frantic with worry. Victoria closed her laptop, suddenly restless. The company would survive without her for a few days. Finding the man who'd saved her life became not just an obligation, but an unexpected priority. There was something about his actions, the rescue followed by disappearance, that she couldn't reconcile with her understanding of human nature. It felt like an unsolved equation, an anomaly in her data-driven world. He saved my life without expecting anything in return. The realization settled in her chest with unfamiliar weight. In my world, that's not naivete. That's integrity I'd forgotten existed. By Wednesday morning, Victoria had checked herself out against medical advice and driven to Port Haven. Instead of returning to her Boston penthouse or New York office, she checked into a small bed and breakfast overlooking the harbor. She told the proprietor, a chatty woman named Beth, that she was a writer researching coastal community. The partial truth seemed better than explaining she was a billionaire CEO hunting for the fisherman who'd saved her life. From this base, Victoria began her own investigation in parallel to David Reynolds's more official efforts. Where he approached harbor masters and official records, she sought out the human elements. Coffee shops, local stores, the community bulletin board at the public library. People who might not talk to an obvious investigator, but would chat with a friendly visitor about local characters and notable events. Victoria had built her career on understanding people, on seeing patterns and connections others missed. Reynolds was thorough, but he was looking for a specific type of hero. Probably someone young, ambitious, seeking recognition. Victoria's fragmented memories suggested someone quite different. Older, weathered, with reasons for avoiding attention that went beyond simple modesty. At Murphy's Diner on Saturday morning, Victoria ordered coffee and blueberry pancakes, listening more than talking as the regulars discussed local news. Their theories about the mysterious rescuer ranged from plausible to ridiculous. But one comment caught her attention. Old Walt Johnson mentioning that whoever it was must have had a damn good reason for staying quiet, what with that reward money on the table. Victoria approached Walt after the others left, introducing herself as a writer interested in maritime culture. Walt, suspicious at first, warmed to her genuine questions about the unwritten codes of the water. He explained the ethics that governed men like him. You help because it's right, not for recognition or reward. Real heroes don't stick around for cameras. They do what needs doing and go home to their families. When she casually brought up the yacht rescue, Walt's expression shifted subtly. He didn't know who had done it, he claimed, but he respected their choice to remain anonymous. Some men can't afford to be heroes, ma'am. Walt's next words stayed with Victoria long after they parted. Not with what it might cost them. That afternoon, Victoria visited the local library, ostensibly researching Port Haven's history, but actually observing the community. The library occupied an old Victorian house overlooking the harbor, its reading room filled with comfortable chairs and large windows capturing the view. At a small table in the children's section, a blonde girl, about 8 years old, was drawing intently, surrounded by colored pencils. Victoria found herself watching the child, struck by her concentration and the subject of her artwork, boats on water, rendered with surprising skill for her age. Victoria moved closer, genuinely impressed by the detail in the girl's work. The child looked up, blue eyes curious but not shy. "You're really talented." The girl beamed with pride, launching into an explanation of the different types of boats she'd drawn. Their conversation flowed naturally, the child's enthusiasm for art and the sea evident in every word. When the girl mentioned that her father fixed boats at Peterson's Marine, Victoria felt a prickle of interest, but kept her expression neutral. The girl's next drawing captured Victoria's full attention. It showed a yacht with orange flames erupting from its windows, a small boat approaching through dark water, a figure being carried to safety. "That's an interesting picture. What made you draw this?" "I saw it from my bedroom window Monday morning." The girl's voice carried matter-of-fact pride. "The big boom woke me up at 4:30. I watched my daddy row out to the burning yacht and save someone. He's really brave. But he said it's private and I shouldn't tell people. She looked up suddenly, worry crossing her face. I'm not supposed to talk about it.
Please don't tell anyone I told you. Victoria's pulse quickened, but she kept her voice gentle. Your secret's safe with me. What's your name?
Zoe Thompson.
Before Victoria could ask anything else, the girl glanced at the clock and began gathering her art supplies.
I have to go. My daddy picks me up at 3 on Saturdays.
Victoria watched through the window as Zoe ran to a weathered pickup truck where a man waited. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair graying at the temples. Even from a distance, something about his posture, the way he knelt to hug his daughter, triggered Victoria's fragmented memories of the rescue. She remained in the library until they drove away, mind racing. The girl's drawings, her eyewitness account from her bedroom window, her careful mention that it was supposed to be private, it all pointed to one conclusion. Zoe Thompson's father was her rescuer. A quick internet search on her phone confirmed Marcus Thompson worked at Peterson's Marine. The pieces were falling into place, but Victoria needed to be certain. She called David Reynolds, instructing him to discreetly gather information on Marcus Thompson. Not through direct questioning that might alert him, but through public records and careful observation. Reynolds's preliminary report came back within hours. Marcus Thompson, 42, widower, raising his daughter Zoe alone since his wife Jennifer's death from cancer 3 years ago. Former Navy, now working as a mechanic and part-time fisherman. No criminal record, good standing in the community, but some financial difficulties evident from public records, a mortgage barely kept current, medical liens that suggested ongoing healthcare costs. The final detail in Reynolds's report made Victoria's chest tighten. Marcus Thompson was currently involved in a custody dispute with his late wife's parents, Charles and Eleanor Bradford of Boston. The case was scheduled for hearing in 4 weeks. Everything clicked into place. A man fighting to keep custody of his daughter couldn't risk the scrutiny that would come from media attention, especially not if financial instability was being used against him in court. Walking away from the rescue and the reward had been his only option if he wanted to protect his family. Victoria sat by the window of her room at the bed and breakfast, watching sunset over the harbor. She'd found her rescuer, but the discovery had only deepened the mystery. Marcus Thompson had saved her without expectation of recognition or reward, an act that challenged everything she thought she knew about human motivation. Her phone buzzed with urgent emails from Sterling Technologies. Derek Morrison, her COO, needed decisions about quarterly strategy and a potential acquisition. The real world was intruding on her investigation, demanding she return to her role as CEO. Victoria sent brief responses, buying herself another day in Port Haven before she'd need to face corporate obligations. Monday morning, Victoria drove to Peterson's Marine. The plan was simple. Inquire about boat engine repair services, observe Marcus Thompson, confirm he was indeed her rescuer. She wasn't certain what she'd do with that confirmation, only that she needed to see him, understand him, before deciding next steps. The weathered building smelled of engine oil and salt water, its walls covered with nautical charts and faded photographs of record catches. She spotted Marcus immediately, working on an outboard motor in the back of the shop. His focus was absolute, hands moving with practiced precision through the engine components. Victoria approached slowly, taking in details. The calluses on his hands, the slight stiffness in his left shoulder suggesting an old injury, the worn wedding band still on his finger 3 years after his wife's death. This was unquestionably the man who had pulled her from the burning yacht. Though he looked different in daylight, more guarded, the weight of responsibility evident in the set of his shoulders. Marcus looked up as she neared his workstation, expression shifting from professional inquiry to recognition and then carefully controlled neutrality. He knew exactly who she was. "Morning. Can I help you with something?" His voice was measured, revealing nothing beyond basic customer service. Victoria matched his tone,
introducing herself simply as someone interested in engine repair services for a boat she was considering purchasing. "What kind of engine are you looking at?" Marcus answered her questions with professional courtesy, explaining the differences between fuel injection and carburetor systems, discussing prop pitch selection and maintenance schedules. His knowledge was encyclopedic, but delivered without condescension. The conversation remained superficial, both of them dancing around the truth neither would acknowledge. As she asked about service costs, Victoria noticed a child's drawing partially visible beneath a repair manual on Marcus's workbench. Unmistakably, the yacht fire, rendered in crayon with surprising detail. "Your daughter's artwork?" Marcus's hand moved almost imperceptibly to cover the drawing more completely. "She likes to draw what she sees." Their eyes met. In that moment, the pretense between them became transparent. They both knew. He knew that she knew, and she understood why he would never admit it. "I appreciate the information." Victoria stepped back, decision crystallizing. "I'll think about it and get back to you if I decide to move forward." Marcus nodded, already returning his attention to the engine, though tension remained in his shoulders. Victoria left Peterson's Marine with certainty, but no clear plan. Marcus Thompson had saved her life and wanted nothing in return. No recognition, no reward, no acknowledgement. Approaching him directly would only create the very problems he'd risked his life to avoid. She spent Monday evening in her room, working through options. Every scenario she constructed ended the same way. Her intervention, however well-intentioned, would bring attention Marcus couldn't afford. The custody hearing was 4 weeks away. The Bradfords were waiting for any ammunition they could use against him. A connection to a billionaire CEO would be twisted into evidence of instability, poor judgment, or opportunism. The only ethical choice was to respect Marcus's silence. Walk away, leave Port Haven, return to her life in New York and Boston. Let him protect his daughter the way he saw fit. But Victoria found herself unable to make that choice. Tuesday morning brought another email from Reynolds, this time with more detailed financial information. Marcus's mortgage was 3 months behind. The medical liens totaled over $30,000. His daughter required cardiac surgery that insurance would only partially cover. The custody hearing would almost certainly focus on his inability to provide adequate medical care. Victoria stared at the numbers, understanding dawning. Marcus hadn't just walked away from $25,000 in reward money. He'd walked away from the solution to every financial problem destroying his life, because accepting that money meant losing his daughter. She made 2 phone calls. The first to Sarah, instructing her to research pediatric cardiac grants and foundation structures. The second to her attorney, asking about anonymous charitable giving that couldn't be traced back to the donor. Wednesday morning, Victoria was preparing to return to New York when her phone rang. Unknown Port Haven number. "Miss Sterling, this is Peterson's Marine. Marcus Thompson asked me to give you a call. He has some information about that engine repair you were asking about, if you're still in town." Victoria's pulse quickened. Marcus was reaching out. After 2 days of silence, he was making contact. "I can be there in 20 minutes. She arrived to find the marina nearly empty, most workers gone for lunch. Marcus stood by his workstation, wiping his hands on a shop rag with methodical precision. "You left this." He held out her business card, the one she'd given him during their conversation. "Found it on the floor after you left. Figured you might need it." It was an excuse, transparent but necessary. Victoria took the card, understanding the real message. He was willing to talk, but only here, only now, only in private. "Thank you." Marcus set down the rag, meeting her eyes directly for the first time since Monday. "You know." It wasn't a question. Victoria saw no point in denying it. "Your daughter's drawings are very detailed." Marcus exhaled slowly, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "Zoe sees everything. Always has." She was watching from her bedroom window that morning. Victoria waited, letting him control the conversation. I appreciate what you're trying to do. Marcus's voice remained steady but carried an edge of steel beneath. Coming here, asking questions, hiring investigators. But I need you to understand something. My daughter is everything. The custody hearing is 4 weeks away. Any connection to you, any publicity, any hint that I'm cultivating relationships with wealthy people, it destroys me in court. I know. Then you also know I can't accept any help, any money, anything that links us together. I know that too. Marcus studied her face, searching for something. Then why are you still here? Victoria found herself without a prepared answer. The truth emerged raw and unpolished. Because you saved my life, expecting nothing in return, and I've spent 20 years in a world where everyone wants something. I don't know how to process that. I don't know how to walk away when I have resources that could help, and you have needs I could address. Marcus's expression softened fractionally. Some debts can't be repaid, Miss Sterling. Some things just are. I did what anyone would do. But you didn't just save me. You sacrificed recognition, money, everything that could have solved your problems for your daughter. For my daughter. Marcus's voice held absolute certainty, and I'd do it again tomorrow. That's not heroism. That's just being a father. The simple declaration carried more weight than any corporate mission statement Victoria had ever written. This was a man who understood priorities with clarity she'd never achieved despite all her success. If circumstances were different, Victoria began, but Marcus cut her off gently. They're not, and I need you to respect that. Victoria nodded, recognizing the boundary he was drawing. She'd come to Port Haven searching for her rescuer, found him, and now had to walk away. It should have felt like resolution. Instead, it felt incomplete. I should let you get back to work. She turned to leave, had nearly reached the door, when Marcus spoke again. Miss Sterling? Victoria? She looked back. Thank you for understanding and for not making this harder than it already is. Thursday morning started like any other. Marcus arrived at Peterson's Marine at 7:30, coffee cooling on his workbench as he tackled a stubborn fuel pump replacement. The work absorbed him, technical problems offering temporary escape from worries about money and custody hearings and impossible choices. His phone rang at 10:45, Port Haven Elementary. Marcus's stomach dropped before he even answered. Mr. Thompson? This is Nurse Carver. Zoe collapsed during recess. She's conscious, but her heartbeat is irregular. We've called an ambulance. They're taking her to Portland Children's Hospital. The words reached him through a fog of sudden terror. Conscious. Irregular heartbeat. Ambulance. When did it start? Is she breathing okay? About 5 minutes ago. She's breathing but says her chest hurts. The paramedics just arrived. We'll meet you at the hospital. Marcus was already moving, grabbing his keys, shouting to Pete that he had an emergency. The drive to Portland would take an hour, maybe 45 minutes if he pushed it. Every second Zoe spent scared and hurting felt like a failure he couldn't fix. He'd made it to the parking lot when his phone rang again, this time an unknown number. Marcus? It's Victoria Sterling. I just heard about Zoe from the hospital network. I have alerts set up. I'm 15 minutes from Port Haven. Let me drive you. His first instinct was to refuse, maintain the boundaries they'd established, but terror for Zoe overrode everything else. Victoria could get him there faster than he could drive himself, and every minute mattered. I'm at Peterson's Marine. I'm on my way. She arrived in less than 10 minutes, pulling up in a rental sedan. Marcus climbed in without a word, hands clenched in his lap as Victoria accelerated onto the coastal highway. They'll take good care of her. Victoria's voice was steady, factual. Portland Children's has one of the best pediatric cardiac units in the Northeast. Whatever's happening, she's going to the right place. Marcus nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in his throat. This was it. The crisis he'd been dreading. The one he couldn't afford. The one that would prove Charles and Eleanor right about his inadequacy. I had a heart condition when I was 9. Victoria kept talking, filling the silence. Mitral valve repair. Probably similar to what Zoe needs. The surgery was terrifying, but I made a full recovery. I'm fine now. The personal revelation cut through some of Marcus's panic. Victoria Sterling sharing childhood vulnerability, offering comfort instead of platitudes about thoughts and prayers. How long ago? 31 years. And I've never had a single complication since. They drove in silence for several miles, the main coastline blurring past. Marcus's phone buzzed with updates from the school, from the ambulance crew, fragments of information that told him nothing useful. Stable, conscious, transport proceeding normally. Victoria's knuckles were white on the steering wheel, though her speed never wavered. Focused intensity that reminded Marcus she'd built an empire through sheer force of will. If determination could protect Zoe, they'd both be wielding it like weapons. The hospital came into view, modern glass and steel rising against gray sky. Victoria pulled up to the emergency entrance, barely stopping before Marcus was out and running toward the automatic doors. Victoria followed at a respectful distance, understanding this was no longer about their complicated connection, but about a father terrified for his child. Whatever came next would reshape both their lives in ways neither could predict. The rescue that began on burning water was about to become something far more complex, a chance for both of them to save and be saved in ways they'd never imagined. Portland Children's Hospital gleamed white against the afternoon sky, its corridors smelling of antiseptic and fear. Marcus found Zoe in a curtained bay of the emergency department, small and pale against white sheets, electrodes dotting her chest like unwanted jewelry. Monitors tracked her heart's stuttering rhythm, each irregular beep a reminder of how fragile everything was. Dr. Rachel Morrison was already there, having been called by the emergency team. She looked up as Marcus entered, professional concern etched in the lines around her eyes. Zoe's stable for now, but we need to move fast. The echocardiogram shows significant deterioration. Her mitral valve isn't just compromised anymore, it's failing. Marcus took Zoe's hand, feeling how cold her fingers were. She managed a weak smile that broke something in his chest. "Daddy." Her voice came small and frightened. "My heart feels funny." "I know, baby girl. The doctors are going to fix it." Dr. Morrison pulled Marcus aside, speaking in low tones that somehow made everything worse. "We're transferring her to the cardiac unit immediately. Surgery can't wait weeks anymore. We're looking at 48 hours, maybe less. The valve could fail completely at any time. The cost, we'll deal with financial paperwork after she's stable. Right now, we need your consent to transfer and begin surgical prep." Marcus signed forms with hands that wanted to shake, forcing steadiness he didn't feel. Behind him, Victoria stood near the doorway, maintaining distance but present in a way that somehow steadied him, despite their agreement to stay separate. An hour later, Zoe had been moved to the cardiac intensive care unit. The room was larger, equipped with more sophisticated monitoring equipment that tracked every flutter of her damaged heart. A team of specialists cycled through, cardiologists, anesthesiologists, surgical nurses, each one explaining procedures in calm voices that couldn't quite mask the urgency. Marcus called Isaiah Washington from the hospital corridor, updating him on Zoe's condition. His lawyer's response was immediate and grim. "This complicates the custody hearing. The Bradfords will argue this proves you can't provide adequate medical care." They'd be wrong. Marcus's voice came harder than intended. "This is a medical emergency. It has nothing to do with my parenting. You know that. I know that. But in court, perception matters as much as reality. Be prepared for them to use this. Marcus ended the call and leaned against the wall, exhaustion and terror warring for dominance. He'd been awake since 4 that morning, pulled a woman from burning water, worked a full shift, and now faced his daughter's failing heart and the legal system's cold calculations. Victoria appeared beside him, carrying 2 cups of coffee. She handed him one without asking if he wanted it. "Drink. You need to stay functional for Zoe." He took the cup, grateful despite everything. "You should go. Your company needs you, and I need to focus on Zoe." "We had an agreement." Victoria's expression shifted into something harder, more corporate. "Agreements can be modified when circumstances change. I'm staying until she's out of surgery." Before Marcus could argue, the elevator doors opened. Charles and Eleanor Bradford stepped out, expensive clothes and rigid posture announcing their presence like a declaration of war. They'd been notified as Zoe's secondary emergency contacts, a concession Marcus had made during the initial custody negotiations, one he now regretted. Eleanor's gaze swept the corridor, landing on Marcus with an expression mixing genuine concern and something that looked like vindication. Charles spotted Victoria, recognition dawning in his eyes with calculating precision. "Mr. Thompson." Charles's voice carried the authority of decades in courtrooms. "What's Zoe's condition?" Marcus provided the medical details, watching Eleanor's face crumble as she processed the severity. Whatever their differences, her love for Zoe was authentic. That made this harder, not easier. "We need to see her." Eleanor's voice trembled. "Right now." They moved together toward Zoe's room, an uneasy procession of adults united only by shared fear for a child. Zoe's face brightened when she saw her grandparents, innocent joy untainted by the legal battle being waged over her future. "Grandma! Grandpa!" Eleanor swept to the bedside, taking Zoe's hand with careful gentleness. Charles followed, producing a stuffed animal from his briefcase, a new otter to join Zoe's collection. Marcus watched from near the door, feeling simultaneously grateful for their love and furious at their presence. They were here because they cared, but they'd used this crisis as ammunition. The contradiction sat heavy in his chest. Charles turned from Zoe's bed, eyes finding Victoria still standing in the corridor. "Miss Sterling, I didn't expect to find you here." The implication hung unspoken. What business did a billionaire CEO have in a middle-class father's family crisis? Victoria met his gaze without flinching. "I was nearby when I heard about Zoe's emergency. I gave Marcus a ride to the hospital." "How convenient." Charles's tone carried skepticism, sharp as surgical steel. "You just happened to be nearby when Thompson's daughter had a medical crisis?" Before Victoria could respond, Dr. Morrison returned with preliminary surgical schedules. The conversation shifted to medical logistics, but Marcus caught the look Charles exchanged with Eleanor. They'd already decided Victoria's presence was suspicious, evidence of something they could exploit. The evening brought more tests, more forms, more explanations from specialists. Dr. James Kellerman, the cardiac surgeon who would perform Zoe's operation, laid out the procedure with clinical precision. 6 to 8 hours. Mitral valve repair. High success rate, but genuine risks. Recovery would require weeks of careful monitoring and restricted activity. Marcus signed consent forms, each signature feeling like a gamble with his daughter's life. The financial counselor appeared with cost estimates that made his vision narrow. $120,000. Insurance would cover 60%. His out-of-pocket responsibility? $48,000. Exactly $36,000 more than his entire savings. Charles and Eleanor exchanged another look, this one carrying grim satisfaction. The numbers on the page proved what they'd been arguing all along. Marcus couldn't provide what Zoe needed. After the Bradfords left for their hotel,
Marcus found Victoria in the hospital cafeteria, laptop open, phone pressed to her ear as she managed whatever corporate crisis couldn't wait. She ended the call when she saw him, closing the laptop with decisive finality. "I need to tell you something." Victoria's voice dropped to a tone that brooked no argument. "The Sterling Foundation has a pediatric cardiac emergency grant program. Zoe qualifies. It will cover $60,000 of the surgery cost." Marcus's hands clenched on the table between them. "No, we talked about this. No connections, no help that can be traced back to you." "It can't be traced back to me. The foundation operates independently, awards grants based on established criteria."
Single-parent household, medical emergency, demonstrated financial need. Zoe meets every requirement. The timing is too convenient. The Bradfords will know something's wrong. The Bradfords don't audit foundation grant programs. Neither does the court. This is what the foundation does. It helps families facing catastrophic medical costs. You're not special treatment. You're exactly the kind of case we exist to support. Marcus wanted to argue, but exhaustion and desperation were eroding his resistance. $60,000 would reduce his out-of-pocket to $12,000, exactly what he had saved. Zoe would get the surgery she needed without destroying him financially. The word pride felt insufficient for what he'd have to swallow to accept this. "If I agree, it stays between us. Forever." "Agreed." Victoria's expression softened fractionally. "For what it's worth, this isn't charity. You do the same for anyone else." "You already did. You saved my life without knowing who I was or what I could offer. Let someone return that favor." "That's different." "How?" "Because you're the one receiving instead of giving? Seems like ego talking, not principle." The observation landed with uncomfortable accuracy. Marcus had built his identity around self-sufficiency, around not needing anyone. But Zoe's needs exceeded his capacity, and refusing help because it wounded his pride was putting ego above his daughter's life. "Okay." The word came hard. "Okay. Thank you." Victoria nodded and stood, already pulling out her phone. "I'll make the calls tonight. The financial counselor will have the paperwork tomorrow." She left before Marcus could reconsider, corporate efficiency reasserting itself. Within the hour, Victoria departed for her hotel, needing to manage Sterling Technologies remotely before the board noticed she'd been away from critical meetings. Marcus spent the night in Zoe's room, watching monitors and thinking about debts that couldn't be measured in dollars. He'd saved Victoria's life 3 weeks ago. Now she was saving his daughter's future, and the exchange felt both symmetrical and impossibly unbalanced. Friday morning brought the financial counselor with unexpected news delivered in cheerful professional tones. Zoe qualified for a foundation grant covering $60,000. Marcus's responsibility reduced to $12,000, manageable with his savings. The relief was physical, muscles unclenching he hadn't realized were locked tight. But underneath ran a current of unease. Victoria had done this, maneuvered resources and paperwork to create a lifeline that looked like bureaucratic luck. The Bradfords would never know. The court would never know. Only Marcus and Victoria would carry the truth. "Some debts can't be measured in dollars," she'd said. "They're paid in moments that change who we are." Saturday arrived with surgical team precision. Zoe was prepped starting at 6, medications to calm her administered with gentle efficiency. Marcus held her hand as they wheeled her toward the operating room, promising to be there when she woke up. Promises that felt like prayers to a God he'd stopped believing in when Jennifer died. The surgery was scheduled for noon. Charles and Eleanor arrived at 10, settling into the waiting area with the rigid composure of people accustomed to hiding emotions behind professional facades. Victoria appeared shortly after, having driven from Port Haven that morning, corporate obligations temporarily set aside. The four adults occupied an uneasy geography in the surgical waiting room, gravitational forces keeping them in separate orbits. Conversation occurred in sporadic fragments, weather, hospital amenities, anything but the topic consuming all their thoughts. During one strained silence, Victoria's phone erupted with urgent notifications.
She excused herself to take a call, voice transforming mid-conversation into something harder, more commanding. Corporate crisis escalating while she sat in a main hospital waiting for a little girl's surgery to conclude. When she returned, strain showed in the tightness around her eyes. "Everything okay?" Marcus asked, knowing it wasn't. "Derek Morrison is making a move." Victoria's voice stayed level, but fury burned underneath. "Using my absence to convince the board I've lost focus. He scheduled an emergency meeting for Monday. Can you stop it? Not from here, and not without sacrificing other things that matter more right now." Eleanor watched this exchange with calculating interest, reading dynamics that would fuel future legal arguments. 2 hours into the surgery, Dr. Morrison appeared with an update. Zoe was stable, procedure proceeding as expected, but they'd discovered additional valve damage requiring more extensive repair. Surgery would extend at least 3 more hours. The news landed like stones in still water. More time under anesthesia meant more risk. More extensive damage meant longer recovery. But most immediately, it meant more waiting while uncertainty compounded itself. Victoria made more calls, managing her company remotely with clipped efficiency. Marcus paced circuits around the waiting area. Charles and Eleanor maintained their vigil with practiced stoicism that only cracked when they thought no one was watching. At hour 7, Dr. Kellerman emerged in surgical scrubs, expression carefully neutral. "The surgery was successful. We repaired the valve more extensively than initially planned, but the prognosis is excellent. Zoe's being transferred to cardiac ICU now. She'll be there at least 48 hours before moving to a regular room." Relief crashed through the waiting room, breaking down barriers that had held for hours. Eleanor actually embraced Marcus, grief and fear overwhelming social divisions. Charles's hand found Marcus's shoulder, grip firm with shared emotion. Victoria remained slightly apart, allowing them this family moment. But her eyes held something Marcus recognized: investment beyond obligation, care that had evolved past mere gratitude. Zoe wouldn't be conscious for hours. Only one person could stay in ICU initially. Marcus surprised himself by suggesting Charles and Eleanor take the first shift, partial peace offering, partial exhaustion. He needed to speak with Victoria before she left for New York. The hospital's small courtyard provided privacy, despite November cold. Victoria had already arranged for her corporate jet to be fueled and ready at Portland Airport, retreat back to crisis management inevitable. "Thank you." Marcus found the words inadequate but necessary. "For the grant, for staying, for everything you've done that you'll never be able to acknowledge publicly." Victoria's expression held complexity. He was learning to read. "Jennifer, your wife, what was she like?" The question caught him off guard, shift from logistics to personal. Strong, stubborn, she knew what mattered and refused to compromise on it. "When she got sick, she made me promise to give Zoe everything she needed, freedom to choose her own path instead of living according to someone else's expectations." Victoria nodded slowly. "My parents sent gifts and specialists when I was sick. Expensive presents instead of presents. I learned early that money solves problems but doesn't replace showing up. That's why this grant program exists, so kids like Zoe get both resources and care." Marcus understood what she wasn't saying. Victoria was rewriting her own childhood through this foundation, giving other families what hers had lacked. "What's happening with your company? Is it serious?" Victoria's laugh held no humor. "Derek's been planning this for months, using my time in Maine as evidence I've lost focus. He's also closed a manufacturing plant without my approval, 200 people laid off to boost quarterly numbers."
The board meeting Monday will determine whether I keep control or get sidelined into strategic advisory while he runs operations. Can you win? Maybe. If I'm there, fighting, instead of here. But being here matters more than quarterly reports. Her phone buzzed again. Victoria glanced at it, jaw tightening. I need to go. The car's waiting. She turned to leave, then paused. The custody hearing is still scheduled for 2 weeks out? Yes. Isaiah says the Bradfords will use Zoe's emergency to argue I can't provide adequate care. They'd be wrong. They'd have financial evidence that looks persuasive to judges. Victoria's expression shifted into something calculating and cold. CEO mode, fully engaged. What if that evidence changed? What if someone testified that financial concerns were addressed and Zoe's care was never compromised? You can't testify. That links us publicly, exactly what we've been avoiding. I can testify about the Foundation's grant program generally. Character witness for a man who saved my life. The connection is already public. I was rescued by an anonymous fisherman who turned out to be you. That's human interest, not conspiracy. The Bradfords will still argue it's suspicious. Let them. I'll be under oath. They'll be speculating. Victoria pulled out her phone. I'll have my attorney coordinate with Isaiah, if you're comfortable with it. Marcus weighed the offer against everything that could go wrong. Victoria Sterling on the witness stand would draw media attention they'd both avoided, but it might also neutralize the Bradfords' financial arguments, shift the narrative from Marcus's inadequacy to his resourcefulness in securing help for his daughter. Okay, if you're willing to take that risk. Some choices define who we are, Marcus. This is one of them. She left for the airport, corporate crisis pulling her back to the world she'd built. Marcus returned to find Zoe in ICU, small and brave, despite tubes and monitors. The next 48 hours passed in a blur of medical updates and careful optimism. Tuesday morning brought visitors Marcus hadn't expected. Isaiah Washington arrived with a legal associate and an expression mixing concern with fury. We have a problem. Isaiah laid out papers on the small table in the family consultation room. Charles and Eleanor had filed an emergency motion for temporary custody, claiming Zoe's medical crisis proved Marcus's inability to provide adequate post-surgical care. The hearing was scheduled for the following Monday, exactly 1 week away, fast-tracked due to the emergency petition. Betrayal burned hotter than Marcus expected. The Bradfords had stood beside him during Zoe's surgery, shared genuine fear and relief, then immediately weaponized the crisis for legal advantage. They filed this yesterday, while we were celebrating Zoe making it through surgery. Isaiah's voice held professional detachment, masking personal outrage. Their argument is that you lack financial resources for proper recovery care. They're offering private nursing, proximity to specialists, a home equipped for medical monitoring. The judge might find it compelling, especially with Zoe's condition as serious as it is. Zoe needs familiarity during recovery, not a new environment. I agree, but we need to counter their resources argument. The Foundation grant helps, but they'll argue one-time assistance doesn't address ongoing needs. Victoria's offer to testify? Isaiah nodded. That changes the dynamic significantly. A character witness of her stature shifts perception from struggling single father to resourceful parent with community support. Set it up. Marcus felt anger crystallize into determination. They want to turn this into a fight about money? Let's show them money isn't what makes someone a good parent. Over the next 5 days, Zoe's condition improved steadily. She moved from ICU to a regular room Thursday, began physical therapy Friday, showed strong healing Saturday. Dr. Morrison was pleased with her progress, cautiously optimistic about discharge within another week. Charles and Eleanor maintained daily visits, bringing gifts and gentle conversation with Zoe. They never mentioned the custody motion to Marcus directly, creating surreal theater where everyone performed normalcy while legal warfare raged beneath the surface. Sunday evening, Marcus confronted them in the hospital family room after Zoe had fallen asleep. Small space with uncomfortable chairs and fluorescent lights that flattened everything to harsh clarity. You filed for emergency custody while pretending to support us during her surgery. His voice stayed controlled, but fury leaked through. Eleanor's composure fractured, tears welling in eyes that had stayed dry through worse crises. "We're terrified of losing her." Charles stood beside his wife, courtroom discipline holding him rigid. "You can barely afford her medical care, Marcus. What happens at the next emergency? Will another convenient grant appear? Will you find another billionaire to rescue you? I'd rather work 3 jobs than let Zoe grow up thinking love equals money. You can't buy your way into a child's heart. You earn it by showing up day after day when cameras aren't watching and nobody's keeping score." The silence that followed held weight beyond words. Eleanor looked at Charles, something passing between them that Marcus couldn't read. "We loved Jennifer more than we knew how to show." Eleanor's voice broke on their daughter's name. "We failed her. She pulled away from us because we pushed too hard, demanded too much. We can't lose Zoe the same way." "Then stop trying to take her from the one person she has left." "I'm not the enemy. I'm her father." No resolution emerged, but something shifted in the room's atmosphere. Seeds planted that might grow into understanding, given time and care neither of them had right now. Monday morning brought Cumberland County Family Court under gray November skies. Marcus had kissed Zoe goodbye at the hospital, promising to return with good news he wasn't certain he could deliver. Isaiah had prepared him thoroughly, but preparation felt inadequate against the Bradfords' resources. The courthouse waiting area hummed with subdued tension. Charles and Eleanor arrived with Howard Grayson, their attorney, Boston family law specialist whose reputation preceded him like advance artillery. Isaiah's modest practice looked outgunned before proceedings even began. What changed the atmosphere entirely was Victoria Sterling's entrance. Still wearing yesterday's clothes, clearly direct from the airport, she caused immediate disruption to the room's equilibrium. Court personnel straightened, observers whispered. Even Grayson momentarily lost his practiced composure. Charles and Eleanor conferred urgently with their attorney, reassessing strategy based on Victoria's unexpected appearance. The tactical advantage shifted before Judge Eleanor Harmon called them to order. The courtroom felt smaller than its actual dimensions, compressed by the weight of what would be decided here. Judge Harmon opened with clear parameters. This emergency hearing would determine Zoe's temporary placement during recovery, with full custody proceedings deferred until she'd healed. Grayson presented the Bradfords' case with polished precision. Their Boston home offered superior post-surgical care, private nursing staff, proximity to top cardiac specialists, financial stability that ensured no gap in treatment. Marcus's financial struggles, Grayson argued, created genuine risk to Zoe's recovery. The logical conclusion was temporary placement with grandparents who could provide everything needed. Isaiah countered with evidence of Marcus's preparation. Approved medical leave from Peterson's Marine. Home modifications completed with help from Port Haven community. Network of neighbors organized to provide support. Pete Peterson managing supply runs, Walt Johnson coordinating meal preparation, the school arranging homebound instruction. He emphasized emotional continuity. Zoe needed familiar surroundings during stressful recovery. Separation from her father would cause psychological harm, potentially impacting physical healing. The foundation grant demonstrated Marcus's resourcefulness in securing necessary support. Judge Harmon's questions focused on practicalities. Could Marcus truly provide adequate monitoring? What happened if complications arose? How would he manage if Zoe needed emergency care? Isaiah presented Zoe's own drawings as evidence. Artwork created during hospitalization showing Marcus as constant protector, their home as safe haven, her understanding of recovery through art rather than fear. When Victoria was called to testify, the courtroom's attention sharpened completely. She took the oath with the same confidence she brought to congressional hearings, settling into the witness chair like it was a board meeting she intended to control. Her testimony began with facts: the yacht fire, the rescue, Marcus's choice to remain anonymous despite significant reward offered. She established character through actions rather than abstractions, a man who risked his life without expectation of recognition or reward. The most powerful moment came when she addressed financial concerns directly. The Sterling Foundation's Pediatric Cardiac Emergency Grant Program had been established precisely for cases like Zoe's. Single-parent households facing catastrophic medical costs with demonstrated need. $60,000 awarded based on criteria, not personal connections. This revelation neutralized the Bradfords' primary argument. Financial instability wasn't permanent character flaw, but temporary challenge already addressed through legitimate support systems. Grayson attempted to undermine her testimony on cross-examination, suggesting transactional motivations. Marcus saved Victoria's life. Now she repaid the debt by financing medical care and supporting custody claims. Victoria's response cut through legal maneuvering with precise directness. Mr. Thompson had multiple opportunities to capitalize on rescuing me. A $25,000 reward was offered publicly. Media coverage would have followed. Instead, he went home to his daughter because that's his priority. Her well-being above financial gain or recognition. In my experience building a company from nothing, that kind of integrity is exactly what I'd want in someone raising a child. I've made billion-dollar deals that I'll forget tomorrow, but standing in this courtroom for Marcus and Zoe is the kind of decision I'll remember when nothing else matters. Isaiah's final evidence shifted the proceeding entirely. Video deposition from the child psychologist working with Zoe during hospitalization. The recording showed Zoe in the hospital playroom, speaking with unguarded honesty. "Daddy always puts me first. Even when he's scared about money, he makes sure I feel safe. Grandma and Grandpa love me, but they don't know my favorite bedtime stories or how I like my sandwiches cut." When asked about her mother's death, Zoe's answer carried simple conviction. "Daddy promised I'd never be alone. He said we'd figure everything out together." I believe him. Judge Harmon reviewed notes in silence that stretched uncomfortably. Grayson conferred with the Bradfords, earlier confidence visibly diminished. The ruling came with judicial clarity, allowing no misinterpretation. Temporary custody remained with Marcus Thompson during Zoe's recovery. Charles and Eleanor Bradford would have structured visitation, weekends and specified holidays. Full custody proceedings deferred minimum 6 months to allow Zoe's complete healing. Judge Harmon's explanation emphasized stability and emotional continuity. Financial concerns had been adequately addressed. Port Haven offered sufficient resources. Most significantly, Zoe's own expressions clearly indicated preference for recovering at home with her father. Relief didn't adequately describe what crashed through Marcus. Isaiah gripped his shoulder in congratulation, while across the aisle, the Bradfords absorbed defeat with practiced composure. Outside the courtroom, Charles and Eleanor approached, with expressions mixing disappointment and something approaching acceptance. "We'd like to see Zoe before we return to Boston." Eleanor's voice stayed controlled, to explain that we'll be visiting regularly. The request came without legal threats. Small but significant shift from adversarial position. Charles added unexpected words. "We've been thinking about finding property in Port Haven, to be closer to Zoe year-round, not just during crises." The olive branch extended awkwardly but genuinely. The 4 adults reached uneasy truce in courthouse hallway. Not friendship, but shared acknowledgement that Zoe's well-being required cooperation rather than continued warfare. Marcus returned to the hospital to find Zoe awake and drawing, stress lifting as he delivered news. They would go home to Port Haven together when Dr. Morrison cleared her discharge in 3 days. That evening, Victoria called from New York, voice tight with exhaustion. "The board meeting is tomorrow. Derek has positioned this as choice between operational excellence and sentimental distraction. He's probably right that I've been distracted, just wrong about whether that matters more than quarterly projections. You'll convince them. Maybe. If being in Manhattan instead of Maine for the past week was the right choice. But it wasn't. Being in that courtroom mattered more than any board meeting. When this is settled, Your company's situation, Zoe's recovery. I'd like to show you Port Haven properly. Not as a CEO handling crisis, but just as yourself. Victoria's response came soft but certain. I'd like that more than makes sense. They ended the call with promises to update each other, two people connected by circumstances neither could have predicted, facing battles that would determine their futures. Marcus sat beside Zoe's bed, watching her sleep, monitors tracking steady heartbeat that had nearly failed. He'd won temporary custody, secured medical care, maintained his family against forces that should have overwhelmed him. But victory felt incomplete, overshadowed by knowledge that larger challenges waited. Port Haven would face its own crisis soon. Development threats Walt had mentioned in passing, corporate interests circling the working waterfront like sharks. Victoria would return to New York and discover whether her company still belonged to her or had been stolen during her absence. And somewhere in the intersection of their vastly different worlds, a connection had formed that neither fully understood. Not obligation, not transaction, but something more complex and fragile. Marcus had saved Victoria's life on burning water. She'd helped save his daughter's future. The exchange should have balanced, debts settled. Instead, it felt like beginning rather than ending. Rescue that didn't conclude when they reached shore, but continued in ways neither could predict. Some debts couldn't be measured in dollars. They were paid in moments that changed who you became afterward. Thursday morning brought Zoe's discharge with careful instructions and follow-up appointments. Marcus loaded their small collection of belongings into his truck, Zoe moving slowly but steadily toward healing. The drive back to Port Haven felt longer than it was, weighted with everything that had happened and everything still waiting. As they crested the final hill bringing the harbor into view, Zoe pressed her hand against the window. Home, Daddy. Home. Whatever came next, corporate battles in New York boardrooms, development threats to Port Haven's working waterfront, the complicated connection between a mechanic and a billionaire CEO. They would face it from this small blue house overlooking the water. Together. 3 days later, Zoe was officially discharged from Portland Children's Hospital. Port Haven welcomed her home with handmade signs decorating the route from the highway, casseroles and care packages lining the porch by the time Marcus pulled into the driveway. Pete Peterson had organized a rotation of neighbors to help with everything from grocery shopping to transportation for follow-up appointments. Zoe's face brightened at the sight of their house perched above the harbor, weathered shingles and narrow porch suddenly beautiful after weeks of sterile hospital rooms. Marcus carried her inside to discover the community had transformed their home during his absence. The living room contained a comfortable daybed positioned to capture the harbor view, allowing Zoe to rest while still participating in daily life. The kitchen had been stocked with meals, the bathroom equipped with safety features, Zoe's bedroom rearranged for easier navigation. Charles and Eleanor arrived an hour later, their reaction to the modest house revealing shifted perspective. Instead of focusing on what it lacked compared to their Boston residence, they noticed care evident in every corner. Photographs of Zoe and Jennifer displayed prominently, artwork covering the refrigerator, books and games selected for a curious 8-year-old mind rather than showpieces meant to impress. Eleanor moved through the rooms slowly, touching things with careful fingers. The quilt Jennifer had made before she got sick, Zoe's crayon drawings taped to the walls, the worn armchair where Marcus read bedtime stories. Her eyes were wet when she returned to the living room. She was loved here. Our Jennifer. I can see it in everything. That evening, after Zoe had fallen asleep in her own bed for the first time in weeks, Marcus sat on the porch with Charles and Eleanor. The conversation unfolded with weight, years of misunderstanding and mutual suspicion slowly giving way to cautious recognition of shared love for Zoe. Charles spoke first, words coming with difficulty for a man who'd built a career on controlled precision. Jennifer struggled with our expectations. We pushed too hard, wanted too much, measured everything in achievements instead of happiness.
She distanced herself from us for 3 years before she met you. We didn't know how to fix it." Marcus listened without interrupting, understanding dawning. The Bradfords' desperate grip on Zoe stemmed not from malice, but from terror. Losing their only grandchild the way they'd lost their only daughter, to choices they hadn't understood and distances they hadn't known how to cross. Eleanor's voice trembled as she continued. "When Jennifer got sick, she let us back in. Those last months, we thought we'd have time to make things right. But cancer doesn't give you time. She died before we could tell her all the things we should have said when she was young." Marcus shared his own perspective then, the financial struggles that began with Jennifer's cancer treatments, the fear that economic limitations would be interpreted as parental inadequacy, the determination to honor Jennifer's wish that Zoe grow up with freedom to choose her own path, rather than following predetermined expectations. The conversation didn't resolve every tension, but it established common ground that it seemed impossible during courthouse confrontations. Zoe needed all of them: her father's steadfast presence, her grandparents' love and resources, the Port Haven community's support. Charles cleared his throat, uncomfortable with vulnerability, but pushing through. "We'd like to be involved grandparents without being intrusive. We're serious about finding property here, not to take over, but to be present." Marcus nodded slowly, seeing possibility where he'd once seen only threat. "Zoe needs you in her life. She needs to know her mother's family, hear stories about Jennifer when she was young. But she also needs to know that home is here, with me, in this town." Eleanor reached across the gap between their chairs, hand finding Marcus's. "We understand that now. We just want to be part of her life, not own it." Over the following weeks, Victoria called daily despite her corporate battles. Her updates about Sterling Technologies grew increasingly concerning. Derek Morrison had consolidated support among key board members, positioning himself as responsible steward while portraying Victoria as distracted by personal matters. The emergency board meeting would determine control of the company she had built from nothing. Marcus found himself checking business news sites regularly, concern for Victoria growing as headlines reported leadership uncertainty and executive committee emergency sessions. Zoe noticed his distraction, her perceptiveness catching frequent phone checks and worried glances. "Is Victoria okay, Daddy? The angel lady sounds sad when she calls." Marcus knelt to Zoe's eye level, choosing words carefully. "She's fighting for something important to her. Sometimes grown-ups have to make hard choices about what matters most." "Like you fighting for me?" "Exactly like that." One morning, Pete arrived at the house with news that shifted Marcus's focus entirely. Coastal Haven Partners, a luxury resort development company, was targeting Port Haven's docks and fishing facilities, the economic heart of the community. Initial offers had been politely declined by the town council, but rumors circulated that the company was preparing to increase pressure through political channels and financial incentives to individual property owners. Marcus immediately recognized the pattern from stories Victoria had shared about corporate takeovers: divide community interests, create competition between neighbors, establish beachheads through key property purchases. Once the process gained momentum, small communities rarely managed to resist the transformation of working waterfronts into tourist destinations. Walt Johnson confirmed the threat that afternoon, appearing at Marcus's door with documents and grave concern. "They're offering double market value to anyone who'll sell. Some folks are tempted. Retirement savings are thin for fishermen our age. But once they get a foothold, the whole harbor changes. Working boats get pushed out for yachts. Families who fish these waters for generations get replaced by summer people." Marcus studied the paperwork, noting the parent company, Meridian Group, a name that triggered recognition. Victoria had mentioned Meridian in passing during one of their phone calls, something about business connections to Sterling Technologies. He called Victoria that night after Zoe was asleep, explaining the threat to Port Haven's traditional character and livelihood. Victoria's response carried immediate concern, followed by a telling silence when Marcus mentioned Meridian Group. "I need to look into something. I'll call you back." She didn't call back that night. When she finally reached Marcus the next afternoon, her voice was tight with controlled fury. "Derek Morrison orchestrated this. He structured Meridian's acquisition of Coastal Haven Partners through subsidiaries specifically to keep it off my radar. He knew about Port Haven, knew about you and Zoe, and he's using this development to distract me while he consolidates power at Sterling." Marcus's stomach tightened. "So your company is behind the threat to destroy this town?" Victoria's response came sharp and determined. "Derek is behind it. Not me, not my company. And I'm going to stop both his takeover attempt and this development. But I need to handle the board meeting first." 2 days later, Victoria called with news delivered in a voice Marcus had never heard from her, quiet but carrying undertones of liberation rather than defeat. The board meeting concluded with a compromise. I remain CEO, but step back from day-to-day operations, focusing on strategic vision and innovation. Derek becomes COO with expanded authority, but he's accountable to me and the restructured board. "It sounds like you lost." Victoria's laugh held unexpected lightness. "I thought so too, initially, but the new structure allows me to work remotely part-time. I can be in Port Haven 2 weeks every month without abandoning corporate responsibilities. Derek gets operational control he wanted, I keep strategic direction, and the board gets stability." The possibility hung between them, unspoken but understood. Port Haven might become more than a temporary crisis location. Then Victoria's tone shifted, edged with steel. "And Derek's going to learn that losing operational battles doesn't mean losing the war. I've spent the past week untangling his corporate maneuvering. Meridian needs Sterling Technologies' intellectual property licenses more than they need Port Haven real estate. I have leverage he didn't anticipate." Marcus received a package 2 days later containing extensive research on Coastal Haven Partners' development patterns in other coastal communities, legal resources for resisting corporate acquisition of public access waterfronts, and case studies of communities that had successfully preserved working harbors through creative zoning and economic structures. Victoria had clearly spent hours compiling information that might help Port Haven protect itself. He presented the materials at an emergency town meeting held at Murphy's Diner. The community's reaction mixed determination with resignation. Port Haven residents valued their way of life, but recognized the financial realities facing small fishing communities. Several property owners admitted they'd already received purchase offers significantly above market value, creating difficult decisions for families with limited retirement savings. Marcus found himself unexpectedly at the center of organizing efforts, his quiet competence and reputation for integrity making him a natural leader despite his usual preference for keeping to himself. Zoe contributed by creating posters and artwork for the Save Our Harbor campaign, her artistic talents serving community purpose beyond personal expression. Charles and Eleanor surprised everyone by throwing their influence behind the preservation effort. Charles's legal background proved invaluable in navigating regulatory frameworks, while Eleanor's experience with Boston philanthropic circles opened doors to conservation organizations interested in protecting working waterfronts. As Thanksgiving approached, Victoria called with news that she would arrive the day before and stay through the weekend, her first extended visit since Zoe's surgery. The timing coincided with another Coastal Haven Partners presentation to the town council, creating both personal anticipation and community tension. Port Haven received its first significant snowfall the day before Thanksgiving, transforming the coastal landscape into white silence broken only by waves. Zoe spent the morning at the window with her sketchbook, capturing the changed environment with growing skill. Charles and Eleanor had arrived early, their initial discomfort in Marcus's kitchen having evolved into good-natured cooperation. The unexpected sound of tires on the snowy driveway drew everyone's attention. Zoe reached the window first,
her exclamation confirming what her artwork had somehow anticipated. "It's Victoria! I told you she'd come." Victoria Sterling stood beside a rental car, snow dusting her dark hair and city coat, looking simultaneously out of place and perfectly right in the Port Haven setting. The corporate armor had been shed, designer suit replaced by jeans and a wool sweater, phone conspicuously absent from her hand. Zoe rushed to the door despite recovery restrictions, enthusiasm overwhelming caution. Marcus followed more slowly, awareness of Charles and Eleanor's watchful presence tempering his reaction to Victoria's arrival. The dynamic shifted with her entrance, not uncomfortably, but with recognition that relationships had evolved during separation. Zoe's immediate attachment manifested in eager updates about recovery progress and art projects. Charles and Eleanor displayed cautious cordiality, their suspicion of Victoria's motives softened by her consistent support during the custody resolution. That evening, after Zoe had gone to bed and the Bradfords had returned to their cottage, Marcus and Victoria finally had the conversation they'd been postponing. Seated on the porch despite November cold, wrapped in blankets against the chill, they addressed the connection that had formed between them. Victoria spoke first, directness cutting through potential awkwardness. "I've restructured my entire company to make room for whatever this is between us. That's either the most irrational decision of my career or the first completely rational choice I've made in years." Marcus recognized the vulnerability beneath her matter-of-fact delivery. A woman accustomed to calculating risk, facing something that defied traditional metrics. Most people spend their lives in one world. You and I crashed into each other at exactly the right moment, and now neither world fits quite the same way it did before. The conversation shifted to practical matters. Victoria had established a working arrangement allowing her to spend up to 2 weeks monthly away from New York, with technology enabling remote management during absences. She planned to purchase property in Port Haven, not the Bradfords' cottage approach, but something permanent that signaled genuine commitment to this place and these people. Before they could discuss personal implications further, Victoria addressed the coastal development situation directly. "I discovered Derek structured Meridian's Port Haven acquisition specifically to keep it off my radar. He knew about my connection here. This is personal for him, not just business." Marcus's expression tightened. "Why? What did Port Haven ever do to him?" Victoria pulled out her phone, showing Marcus research she'd compiled. Derek's father was a commercial fisherman in Rhode Island. Lost his business 20 years ago when a luxury development bought out his harbor. The family went bankrupt. Derek blames what he calls bleeding heart business leaders who don't prioritize profits above everything else. Port Haven is symbolic revenge, proving that sentiment doesn't matter against money and power. Marcus understood then. This wasn't just about real estate or quarterly returns. Derek Morrison was fighting demons, and Port Haven had become collateral damage in his personal war. "I didn't build Sterling Technologies just to watch it destroy communities I care about." Victoria's eyes held steady resolve. "I found leverage points in the corporate structure. Meridian needs our intellectual property licenses for their primary business operations. Without them, they lose contracts worth 10 times what Port Haven development would generate." "What are you proposing?" "An alternative." Victoria leaned forward, intensity radiating. "Port Haven Maritime and Innovation Center combines traditional working waterfront with educational facilities, technology incubator space, and limited tourism designed to complement rather than replace the fishing industry. Funding through Sterling Foundation, conservation organizations your in-laws connected, and community ownership shares that protect local interests." The following morning brought Thanksgiving and the scheduled Coastal Haven Partners presentation to the town council. The council had agreed to the holiday meeting to accommodate executives traveling from Boston, unaware of the strategy behind the timing. Communities focused on family gatherings typically mounted minimal resistance to corporate presentations. Victoria's attendance created immediate disruption to Coastal Haven's orchestrated pitch. The executives recognized the Sterling Technologies CEO instantly, rehearsed talking points faltering as they realized their corporate structure wasn't as anonymous as planned. When the Coastal Haven spokesman began outlining the inevitable economic transition away from commercial fishing, Victoria asked a single pointed question about the Coastal Heritage Preservation Act, legislation she had quietly helped draft through industry associations the previous week. The question revealed preparation and knowledge the development team hadn't anticipated from a small Maine community. The meeting transformed from standard corporate presentation to genuine negotiation when Victoria presented her alternative development model, complete with architectural renderings, financial projections, and letters of commitment from conservation partners. The Port Haven Maritime and Innovation Center would preserve 2/3 of existing dock space for commercial fishing, while creating educational facilities focused on sustainable marine industries. Technology incubator space would attract startups working on ocean monitoring, climate research, and fishing technology innovation. Limited heritage tourism would bring revenue without displacing working families. Most importantly, governance structure ensured community control through a cooperative board where local fishermen and residents held majority voting rights. Outside investors would participate but couldn't dominate decision-making. Marcus watched faces around the room shift from skepticism to cautious hope as Victoria laid out the plan. She wasn't offering charity or imposing solutions from outside. She was proposing partnership that respected Port Haven's character while creating economic sustainability. Walt Johnson asked the question others were thinking. Why would a billionaire CEO care this much about a town of 3,000 people? Victoria's answer came without hesitation, eyes finding Marcus across the room. Because I learned something here that 20 years of business success never taught me. Worth isn't measured in market capitalization or quarterly growth. It's measured in relationships that endure when everything else falls apart. Port Haven saved my life. Not just Marcus pulling me from that yacht, but this entire community showing me what actually matters. The town council voted unanimously to table Coastal Haven's proposal and explore Victoria's alternative. The development company withdrew within a week after Victoria made good on her threat regarding intellectual property licenses. Meridian chose Sterling Technologies' relationship over Port Haven development, and Derek Morrison was forced to sign off on the decision, his personal vendetta thwarted by the very sentimentality he'd tried to exploit. Thanksgiving dinner at the Thompson home became both celebration and strategy session. Zoe presided with 8-year-old dignity, delighted by the fulfillment of her drawing's prediction. Victoria at their table, Charles and Eleanor participating as family rather than adversaries. The entire group focused on preserving Port Haven's future rather than fighting over custody or control. After dinner, while Zoe showed her grandparents her latest art project, Marcus and Victoria stepped outside to watch sunset over the harbor. Winter light transformed the familiar landscape, harsh summer glare replaced by softer golden illumination that revealed different beauty in the coastal setting. I've owned vacation properties all over the world. Victoria's observation carried unexpected depth. Places people save lifetimes to visit once, but this is the first spot that feels like it might become home. Marcus studied her profile, noting how Maine's cold had brought color to her cheeks in ways New York boardrooms never did. So what happens next? With your company, with Port Haven, with... He hesitated, the unspoken question hanging between them. Victoria turned to face him fully, corporate calculation replaced by personal certainty. I'm restructuring my work schedule to spend 2 weeks every month here. I've already made an offer on the Thompson cottage down the shore. Ironic name, I know. The Maritime Center will take about 18 months to launch, which gives us time to build community support and design appropriate governance. Her voice softened. As for us, I think we've both had enough dramatic changes for 1 year. But I'd like to see where this goes, whatever this is. The winter months brought steady progress on multiple fronts. Victoria established her presence in Port Haven through regular 2-week stays, her cottage gradually acquiring personal touches that transformed it from investment property to genuine second home. Her corporate obligations required returns to New York, but technology enabled continuous connection during absences. The Port Haven Maritime and Innovation Center moved from concept to concrete planning. Architectural designs incorporated existing structures while adding facilities that would serve both traditional fishermen and new technology ventures, focusing on sustainable marine industries. The funding structure ensured community control while leveraging outside investment that didn't come with strings attached. Zoe's recovery progressed beyond anyone's hopes. Each follow-up appointment with Dr. Morrison confirmed the surgery's success, her energy returning incrementally until she could participate fully in school and activities. Her artistic talents continued developing, now supplemented by professional instruction Victoria arranged through connections in Boston's art community. Charles and Eleanor's relationship with Marcus evolved toward genuine respect, their initial judgment of his modest circumstances replaced by recognition of his unwavering commitment to Zoe's well-being. They spent Christmas in Port Haven rather than insisting Zoe travel to Boston, another indication of adjusted priorities. February marked 1 year since Zoe's diagnosis and 6 months since her successful surgery. The follow-up appointment with Dr. Morrison brought the best possible news. Zoe's heart function had normalized completely, with no indications of future complications. The medical journey that had dominated their lives for a year could finally be concluded. The celebration dinner included Charles, Eleanor, Victoria, and key Port Haven community members who had supported them throughout Zoe's treatment. The gathering represented a milestone not just in Zoe's recovery, but in relationships formed or transformed during the crisis. After everyone departed and Zoe went to bed, Marcus and Victoria walked along the snowy harbor path, winter moonlight illuminating their way. The conversation acknowledged what had been developing between them, a connection that had begun with rescue and obligation, but evolved into something neither had anticipated. A year ago, I would have said our worlds were too different to find common ground. Marcus's breath formed clouds in the cold air. Now, I'm not sure there are separate worlds, just people who haven't discovered what matters most to them yet. Victoria's response reflected similar evolution. I built a company around the idea that technology connects people across distances. It took nearly drowning, meeting you and Zoe, to understand that connection means something entirely different than I thought. Their relationship progressed deliberately through winter into spring, both aware that Zoe's well-being remained the priority around which other considerations revolved. Marcus maintained appropriate boundaries, ensuring Zoe understood Victoria's growing role in their lives without creating unrealistic expectations or complications. March brought finalization of Sterling Technologies' restructuring, with Victoria's new role established and the executive team reorganized to support distributed leadership. Derek Morrison remained as COO, but under tighter oversight, his authority checked by board reforms Victoria had insisted upon as condition of the compromise. He'd kept his position, but lost the autonomy he'd sought. April saw the anniversary of the yacht fire and rescue, a date that passed without public commemoration, but with private acknowledgement between Marcus and Victoria. The incident that had connected their lives remained significant without defining their relationship. The initial debt of rescued and rescuer, having evolved into mutual respect and deepening affection that needed no origin story to justify its existence. By early summer, the Port Haven Maritime and Innovation Center broke ground with a community ceremony that symbolized both preservation and evolution. The project had gained momentum, with several technology companies specializing in sustainable fishing practices already committed to incubator space. Zoe participated in the groundbreaking. Her artwork featured prominently in the ceremony and incorporated into the building design. At 9 years old, she had transformed from passive patient to active community contributor, her talent serving both personal expression and public purpose. She stood between Marcus and Victoria during the ribbon cutting, holding both their hands with proprietary certainty that made onlookers smile. That evening, as they watched sunset from their favorite harbor bench, Victoria shared news she had been carefully considering for weeks. Techron Industries has approached about acquiring Sterling Technologies. The offer is substantial, life-changing money even by my standards. She paused, studying the harbor lights. 5 years ago, I would have evaluated it solely on financial terms. Now I'm weighing how it affects Port Haven, the Maritime Center, Zoe's future art programs, the employees who've trusted me. Her voice softened. And us. Marcus considered her words, understanding the significance of including their relationship in her decision framework. What are you thinking? I'm thinking I could sell my controlling interest but maintain leadership of the foundation and research division. It would mean significant changes to my role in New York, more freedom to be here. She hesitated, then added with uncharacteristic uncertainty. Perhaps the chance to consider a more permanent arrangement between us. The conversation opened possibilities neither had explicitly voiced before. A shared future beyond coordinated schedules and separate residences. They agreed to consider options thoughtfully rather than rushing decisions, recognizing that permanent commitments would affect not just themselves, but Zoe, Charles, and Eleanor, and the Port Haven community that had become increasingly important to them both. The summer solstice brought Port Haven's annual boat parade, a community celebration coinciding with tourist season. Zoe participated for the first time, her artwork decorating Marcus's fishing boat as it joined the harbor procession. Victoria watched from shore, expression reflecting how thoroughly her priorities had shifted since their first encounter. That evening, as they celebrated with community members at Murphy's Diner, Victoria received the call confirming Techron Industries' final offer. Terms even more favorable than anticipated, with guarantees protecting the Maritime Center, employee positions, and Victoria's leadership of the foundation. Marcus raised a toast when she shared the news, recognizing the significance of the decision she would make. As summer progressed, Victoria's presence in Port Haven extended beyond her scheduled 2-week periods. Her New York apartment increasingly unused as she managed remaining corporate responsibilities remotely. Zoe thrived with this arrangement, developing a relationship with Victoria that complemented rather than competed with her bond with Marcus. In August, Victoria accepted a modified version of Techron's offer, maintaining leadership of the foundation and research division while transferring operational control of Sterling Technologies. The transaction represented not just business evolution, but personal transformation, deliberate choice to prioritize relationship and community over corporate identity. Marcus and Victoria celebrated with a small dinner at her cottage, joined by Zoe, Charles, and Eleanor. The conversation turned to future plans, including Zoe's upcoming school year, the Maritime Center's development schedule, and, most significantly, Victoria's permanent relocation to Port Haven. As Zoe described her latest art project to her grandparents, Marcus and Victoria stepped outside to watch harbor lights reflecting on calm water. The parallel to their first meeting hung unspoken between them. Fire and rescue replaced by peace and partnership. Crisis transformed into choice. Victoria's quiet question broke the contemplative silence. Do you think Zoe would be open to the idea of a sibling someday? Not immediately, but perhaps in the future. The question carried implications beyond family planning, commitment to permanent partnership, creation of new bonds beyond those formed through crisis and recovery, deliberate choice to build life together rather than merely coordinate separate existences. Marcus's response acknowledged both the question's significance and Zoe's centrality to any such decision. I think she'd be the world's most enthusiastic big sister. She's already been asking if we're getting married, and apparently 9-year-olds aren't as patient with relationship timelines as adults try to be. The conversation opened new possibilities, neither making impulsive declarations, but both recognizing the direction their relationship had taken. From rescue to recovery to deliberate choice, from obligation to partnership to family. Spring arrived with a kind of clarity that made Port Haven's beauty undeniable, even to those who'd grown accustomed to it. The Maritime and Innovation Center's construction had progressed through winter, the building now taking recognizable shape above the harbor. Marcus had been involved in the project not just as community advocate, but as technical consultant, his expertise in marine mechanics proving valuable in designing facilities that would actually serve working fishermen rather than just photograph well in promotional materials. The groundbreaking ceremony drew over 200 attendees: fishermen, town council members, conservation partners, technology startup founders, and families who'd lived in Port Haven for generations. Zoe's artwork featured prominently in the building design, her drawings of boats and waves incorporated into decorative panels that would grace the main entrance. After the ceremony, Marcus and Victoria found themselves at the harbor bench that had become their spot, the same bench where they'd had so many conversations over the past year. The water was calm, reflecting late afternoon sunlight in patterns that shifted with each small wave. Victoria pulled something from her pocket, turning it over in her hands. Not a ring, Marcus realized, but something else. A small wooden carving of a boat, simple but beautifully made. Walt made this for me last week. She held it up to catch the light. It's the second chance, your fishing boat. He said it represented what Port Haven means, places where people get opportunities to start over, become who they're meant to be. Marcus took the carving, recognizing Walt's handiwork in the precise details. He's right. This town gave me that when Jennifer died. Community that didn't judge, just showed up and helped. Victoria's expression shifted, something resolving in her eyes. I'm not good at this. Building things, yes. Acquiring companies, negotiating deals, solving problems with money and strategy, that's my language. But this? She gestured between them, encompassing everything unspoken. I don't have a playbook for this. Marcus set the carving carefully on the bench between them. Neither do I. I'm a mechanic who fixes boat engines and raises his daughter. My idea of a good day is Zoe healthy and the bills paid on time. I never imagined sitting here with someone like you, talking about future like it's something we're building together. Victoria turned to face him fully, the setting sun painting her hair with gold light. I'm not asking you to imagine it anymore. I'm asking if you want it, really want it. Because I'm ready to stop being careful and strategic and measured. I'm ready to just... She paused, searching for words. Jump. Marcus understood what she was asking, the leap she was proposing. Not just continued dating or coordinated schedules, but actual commitment. Merging lives, not just spending time together. I'm not afraid of jumping. His voice came steady, certain. I'm afraid of you regretting it 6 months from now, when the novelty wears off and you realize you gave up your company to live in a town where the biggest excitement is the lobster festival. Victoria's laugh broke the tension. Marcus, I've spent 20 years building something that made me wealthy and miserable. The past year in Port Haven has made me happier than any quarterly earnings report ever did. I'm not giving up anything. I'm finally choosing what actually matters. Then yes. Marcus felt something unlock in his chest. Yes, I want to build this with you, whatever this becomes. Victoria's smile transformed her face, corporate mask completely absent. Good, because I bought a ring 3 weeks ago, and I've been carrying it around trying to figure out the right moment to ask you. She pulled a small box from her other pocket, opening it to reveal a simple platinum band. No diamonds, no ostentation, just clean lines and solid craftsmanship. I know traditionally the man asks, but I've never been particularly traditional. So here it is. Marcus Thompson. Will you marry me? Marcus stared at the ring, then at Victoria, then started laughing. Deep, genuine laughter that came from pure joy rather than humor. I've been planning to ask you for a month. I even talked to Zoe about it, got her permission and everything. Victoria's eyes widened. You asked our 9-year-old for permission to propose to me?
She's the most important person in my life. If she wasn't on board, it wouldn't work. And what did she say? That it was about time, and could she be in charge of flowers for the wedding? They sat there laughing together as the sun set over Port Haven Harbor, the absurdity and perfection of the moment washing over them. Two people from impossibly different worlds who'd found common ground in the least likely place, at the least likely time, through the least likely circumstances. Yes, Marcus finally answered the question she'd asked. Yes, I'll marry you. On one condition. Victoria raised an eyebrow. I propose right back, because I want this to be something we both chose equally, not something one of us convinced the other to do. Deal. Marcus didn't have a ring, but he had the wooden carving Walt had made. He held it out to Victoria, the small boat resting in his palm. Victoria Sterling, will you marry me? Will you build a life here in Port Haven with me and Zoe and whatever future we create together? Yes. The word came simple and certain, no hesitation or calculation, just yes. They told Zoe that evening over dinner, the three of them sitting at the kitchen table in the small blue house that had become home to all of them in different ways. Zoe's reaction was exactly what Marcus had predicted: immediate excitement, detailed questions about the wedding, and solemn insistence that she be in charge of flowers and artwork. Charles and Eleanor arrived the next morning, having been summoned by an excited phone call from their granddaughter. Their reaction mixed genuine happiness with lingering surprise that their son-in-law and a billionaire CEO were actually making this work. We're happy for you. Eleanor's words came with tears. Jennifer would have loved Victoria. She always wanted you to find someone who challenged you, made you think differently. The wedding took place 6 months later, a small ceremony on the harbor with Zoe as flower girl and the entire Port Haven community in attendance. Charles walked Zoe down the aisle in a gesture that symbolized the family's evolution from adversaries to alliance. The ceremony itself was simple, vows written by Marcus and Victoria that focused on partnership, presence, and building something lasting. Walt Johnson officiated, having been ordained online specifically for the occasion. His brief homily focused on rescues that go both ways, on communities that save individuals and individuals who save communities, on the unexpected grace of second chances. The reception at Murphy's Diner brought together fishermen and tech executives, conservation partners and local families, people from every part of Marcus and Victoria's merged lives. Zoe's artwork decorated the walls, her drawings documenting their journey from burning yacht to wedding day. As the celebration wound down and guests began departing into the evening, Marcus and Victoria slipped away to the harbor. A small boat waited there, not Marcus's old fishing vessel, but a new one they'd commissioned together. Sleek lines balanced with practical design, built for both work and pleasure. Zoe had insisted on naming it, and she'd made her choice weeks ago. The boat's stern bore fresh lettering, Second Chance. Think we'll ever get tired of this view? Marcus asked as they stood on the dock, Victoria's hand in his. Not in this lifetime. Zoe appeared beside them, still wearing her flower girl dress, petals scattered in her hair. Can we take the boat out? Just the three of us? They climbed aboard as twilight settled over Port Haven, the harbor lights beginning to twinkle against darkening sky. Marcus started the engine while Victoria released the mooring lines, Zoe sitting in the bow with her sketchbook already out. As they motored slowly into the harbor, passing the docks where Marcus had landed that burning morning over a year ago, he understood what Walt had meant about rescues going both ways. He'd pulled Victoria from death, but she'd pulled him from isolation. The town had supported them both, but they'd helped save the town's future. Some rescues don't end when you reach shore, Marcus thought, watching his daughter draw and his wife adjust the trim. They're just beginning. The Second Chance cut through calm water, carrying them into whatever came next. A family built from crisis and choice, bound by love that had nothing to do with obligation and everything to do with recognition.
Recognition that worth wasn't measured in bank accounts or quarterly reports, but in moments like this. 3 people on a boat in a small Maine harbor, heading into darkness lit by harbor lights and the certainty that they'd found their way home.